Hello there, Flip here, and today after doing quite a lot of work looking into and playtesting Raiden, I'm first going to be discussing why I personally think that even though she's not as strong as she once was in her peaks in Inazuma through early Sumeru, she is still a carry asterisk that is still worth making a consideration on despite all the competition, as well as spend the rest of the video detailing all the complicated nuances in how to build her as it varies drastically. But before we do that, as always, if at any point during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta, and I'll try to keep you updated. And with that, let's begin. First, let's just do a quick refresher on how she works. Don't worry Don't worry guys, that was my girlfriend texting me. First, let's just do a quick refresher on how she works. Don't worry, this won't take that long. Raiden is a 5-star electro polearm character that primarily focuses around being an on-field unit to either be a driver on your teams, which is just an on-field unit less focused on personal damage and more about the damage of off-field units, as well as being able to act as a main carry even at C0. Moving on to her talents, as standard, Raiden's normal attacks don't do anything special. Her skill is where things start to get interesting, as she'll cast a purple eyeball that will do an initial instance of electro damage, and then do coordinated attacks afterwards whenever anyone on the team deals damage to an enemy. Important to note that this will only proc when you do damage, so it doesn't work on things like shields. The damage the eye does is not anything noteworthy, especially when compared to characters like Fischl. The main value of the eye comes from the fact that while it's active, it will grant every party member off or on field with an elemental damage bonus that scales with the amount of energy they have. Here's a small little chart to show that. And also, because of its long duration of 25 seconds with a 10-second cooldown, it's a way for Raiden to apply Electro onto enemies at the start of rotations for things like Verdescent or scroll setups, or just contribute to proccing reactions while the rest of your team gets set up. This is a luxury that some other characters like Chlorins don't get, which limits their team options. Now, for the most important part of Raiden's kit, we have her Elemental Burst. Raiden will pull out a sword from her nice bundle of breasts and use the sword coated in her titty sweat to nuke enemies with Electro. And for 7 seconds afterwards, she'll be in her sword stance and deal Electro damage. Even though all of her attacks after her initial slash are triggered by pressing normal attacks, it isn't actually normal attack damage and is actually considered burst damage. But when you attack it, it's still considered a normal attack animation, and therefore Yelan and Jingcho will still work with it. Does this make any sort of sense? No, but it doesn't matter, we don't question it. Besides dealing damage, when Raiden attacks in this state, she will also refund energy to the team for each hit up to 5 times over her burst duration, and this generally ends up being 20 energy without her signature and around 28 with her signature, but I'll show the values later as it's linked to her passive. Raiden's elemental burst also has a mechanic called resolve that the more you have, the more damage your burst will do. The way you generate resolve is by using elemental bursts that aren't Raiden's, and then Raiden will consume all of this resolve when she casts her burst. You really shouldn't worry about this though, however, as it honestly doesn't matter that much in regards to her team building. It is just a means for her to do additional damage. For passives, her Ascension 1 will give you 2 resolve whenever a teammate picks up a particle, with a cooldown of 3 seconds, which will result in about 6 to 8 extra resolve. And lastly, her Ascension 4 will increase the energy regeneration of her burst, which is what allows it to generate upwards of 20 energy, while at the same time giving you electro damage bonus based on your energy recharge. Quick disclaimer, just because you get electro damage based on your ER, energy recharge is still one of the worst offensive stats for Raiden, unless you also have Engulfing Lightning. Attack percent is still a more impactful substat, as well as crit rate and crit damage to her personal damage, but I'll cover those nuances more later. I just wanted to make that clear now. And for talent priorities, you level her burst first and then her skill, and her normal attacks are whatever, they literally do nothing. With her talents covered, I want to talk about some of Raiden's combos in order to optimize her damage. Her best and most recommended one is just spamming N4, which is pressing the normal attack button 4 times, and then cancelling it by either dashing or by pressing the elemental skill button if it's up. This combo is the highest damage you can receive without attack speed buffs and is really easy to execute. It also applies the most Electro out for combos if I remember correctly, and it also allows for things like Fischl C6, Yelan and Jingcho's burst to be triggered more consistently. It is just her best combo generally. In AoE though, you can charge attack spam, as her charge attack AoE is massive, and can be beneficial especially in mobbing content. Now with that done, let's talk about how strong she is. Okay, two things I want to state right off the bat is that you should never pull for Raiden for the sake of her being a hyper bloom trigger. That is stupid. Just use Kuki and save yourself the pull. Raiden is not a notable enough upgrade over using her, if at all, unless you really don't like the fact that she kills herself, or you want to play a Nuvola hyper bloom team. And even now, there is less reason to use hyper bloom Raiden as her on-field playstyle is just stronger, through things like Furina and Chevreuse being added, and also the AoE and comfort that you gain from having her on-field. Raiden has and will always be best as an on-field unit, even at C0, whether as a driver or as a DPS. Speaking of which, in terms of personal damage, if that's what you're looking for, then I also wouldn't really pull for Raiden, as even just looking in the Electro element, you have characters like Ya and Chlorant who can output higher numbers and have stronger overall teams. Though that doesn't mean Raiden as an on-field unit is bad, as you can hopefully see from the gameplay behind me, as it's all C0 Raiden gameplay. It's just that compared to newer units, she doesn't have access to the stronger weapons and artifact sets they get. And also, Raiden was made with this restriction of her damage in mind because she has a lot of other qualities that most on-field units don't have, like being able to batter your entire team during her damage window, as well as having infinite interruption resistance, which is one of the best quality of life features an on-field unit can have, as she'll always be able to execute her optimal combos and won't lose DPS time in her state from being staggered. That is why for me, Raiden doing less damage than other DPS units isn't a massive flaw or reason against pulling, because it's not the only thing she does. There's also her insane teammate diversity, as most other units can be restricted by the fact that some characters just have too high of a burst cost, or they themselves can't fit in a teammate without having to sacrifice their own ER, which is something Raiden doesn't have to worry about at all, which you'll see by going to the team section of the video. Need Bennett for your other half? Great, there are tons of non-Bennett teams she has. Don't have Chevreuse? Great, there are also tons of non-Chevreuse teams. No Hydra unit? Great, she doesn't need them either. And these aren't just minor switches, there are complete archetype changes that no matter what combination of characters you have, you can most likely run a solid Raiden team that will be comfortable to play and not run into any ER gaps. So instead of trying to maximize her damage and being disappointed with that prospect, Raiden is best played at C0 when you can fit in other off-field damage dealers on her teams and comfortably drive or enable them, which is where I think her main value is as a pull and why I personally value her higher than most other on-field units. She does obviously have some flaws. For a character that is building damage, she doesn't as easily get access to sets that give a ton of crit rate. That would help a lot in her case, as she literally has a nuke, and especially on teams more oriented on her damage, missing her initial slash can just be a reset in some cases. There's also the fact that she's a very breakpoint oriented character rather than a sustained DPS, as she does all her damage in a tight window and then does close to none outside of that. This is also tied to her burst, which can lead to overkilling problems as well as killing an enemy and then not getting the energy back for you to be able to burst in the next chamber. Though again, this is somewhat alleviated when you use teams less focused on her damage and more on her driving potential. And with that out of the way, we can finally start the guides talking about her artifacts first. For artifact sets, this is going to be very easy. Farm for Emblem. If you are using an on-field Raiden, there's no reason to not use this set. The only exception to this rule is on Furina teams, and even then Emblem is still better if you need the team energy generation, especially on solo Hydra Furina teams. Then if you're using an off-field Raiden, then your best set is Flowers of Paradise Lost, but if you have a gilded set, it works fine too. It's not that big of a difference between them. Now for the artifact main stats, it depends. Raiden's energy requirement without her signature, or at least the recommended amount, is 200%. You don't need more than this if you're looking for damage on her, but having higher energy may be more beneficial if you notice that your supports are like not bursting comfortably. And if you have Engulfing Lightning, you want to reach that 300% energy threshold or get as close to it, in which case unless you have high refines with Engulfing, you always want an ER Sands. Otherwise, if you can get enough energy recharge without the Sands, then use an attack Sands, as it's better damage wise, as with that Engulfing Lightning, attack is a better offensive substat than ER. And even then, an ER Sands is usually like 5 to 10% worse, so if you value the comfort an ER Sands provides, then go for it. Basically, attack Sands is better damage wise, energy recharge Sands is better comfort wise. For goblets, I don't know why this gets so polarizing. Electro goblets are again almost always the best option. There are only a few exceptions, like if you're using a team that gives no attack buffs and only gives damage percent buffs, in which case attack is better. But if you have a weapon that gives even the slightest amount of attack or just Engulfing Lightning, then electro damage percent is again better. I fucking hate this character. TLDR, if you're using Engulfing Lightning, then ER Sands Electro Goblet is always the best choice. If you're using any other weapon, then get enough energy recharge till you reach 200%, and most of the time electro damage will be your best bet. And you are always using a crit circle or whatever gives you the best ratio. For substat priorities, you have the crit stats at the top, and then attack percent is better offensively unless you haven't reached the 200% ER or 270 ER in the case of an R1 Engulfing Lightning, in which case ER is better than attack. I really hope you caught all of that. And if you play Hyper Bloom, just stack as much Elemental Mastery as possible, but we don't care about you. Now let's talk about her weapons next. Before talking about the weapon options to the Hyper Bloom Raiden players that are still watching, why are you still here? What purpose do you serve? But okay, Dragon's Bane is your best weapon, followed by Moon Piercer. Now shoo like the flies you are. The real Raiden mains are trying to listen. Back on topic, I was going to make a weapon sheet on Raiden, or well, I did make a weapon sheet, but it gave some very odd results that I didn't feel comfortable sharing, as I don't want to mislead people. So I'm going to be giving a more personal ranking of the weapons, explaining the nuances and so on. At least something that I can convey is that all of Raiden's weapons are extremely close damage wise, and as long as you choose from the ones I'm about to recommend, you can't really go wrong. For starters, her obvious best in slot is going to be the Engulfing Lightning no matter the situation, whether it's as a driver or as a DPS. It makes it so that double dipping into ER is more valuable as it converts ER into attack, so ER is less of a wasted substat. This also means that depending on your refinement, your optimal build goes into trying to reach 300% ER without overcapping basically, and also obviously not sacrificing crit stats. Just a good weapon. The Staff of Homa, Jadewing Spear, and Calamity Queller are all just good 5-star stat sticks, and damage rise are only about 5% worse than Engulfing Lightning, but lose out on the utility aspect due to not having ER. With Homa you don't get the full effect of the weapon, but the high base attack and the crit damage substat and getting some benefit of the passive still makes it competitive. With Jade Spear she does actually proc the passive on her burst hits, upkeeping a good attack percent buff, and Calamity Queller is just an attack steroid that actually makes her off-field presence somewhat more notable, which brings up its overall DPS, so still a solid stat stick but worse than Homa and Jade Spear. For the two premier 4-stars we have Deathmatch and Wavebreaker's Fin. None of these are worth going for the sake of using them on Raiden. Wavebreaker's Fin before R3 is not even better than the catch, and even at R5 it's such a minimal upgrade while also ideally wanting you to play a team with an 80 cost. So if you have it at R3 or more, sure it's better than the catch and you can use it on her, but you won't experience a massive leap in damage. And for Deathmatch at Refine 1 in single target it is slightly ahead of the catch, but falls behind in multi-target due to the passive giving less attack, so the catch will be a more consistent choice. But if for whatever reason you get a lot of Deathmatch refinements, then yeah, it becomes one of her best weapons damage wise, even competing with the Jade Spear and Homa in single target. Skyward Spine is only better than the catch if you push out higher combos due to the attack speed or if you have some refines on it, otherwise it's worse than the catch generally. The Staff of Scarlet Sands gives a bunch of crit rate, which means you can build really high crit damage on your Raiden, and when you have a lot of attack buffs on your team, or when you're playing in some Dendro teams, it can be a good weapon for her that even rivals her signature. Lastly we have the catch. It's a very good weapon and it's a free R5. I think people do overestimate its damage potential on Raiden as it does get beaten up by most of the weapons I've mentioned prior, but it's good enough to where you're never going to have to replace it if you don't want to vertically invest into Raiden. Also, it can be better for a majority of her more driving oriented teams. Speaking of which, let's talk about her teams. I would say Raiden has like 3 to 4 different playstyles that all utilize different units. You have her carry teams for one, and then you have her more driving oriented teams, and lastly you have all her Dendro stuff. So let's start with her carry team so I can rant about them. Generally the only character that is a must for these teams is Bennett, and then from there you have the Kazuha team core and the Chevreuse team core. With Kazuha carry cores, if you want to maximize Raiden's personal damage, then you use Sara here, but don't do that. Sara is an awful unit for Raiden at C0 just because, as I've said multiple times, Raiden's solo personal damage just doesn't feel amazing unless you have really good artifact investment to where I can recommend running the team. This also means that all the damage in your team is on Raiden, who's a burst character, so if enemies have a little bit of HP left and you don't reach the breakpoints to kill them, you don't really have a way of finishing them off without breaking your next chamber. And Sara doesn't generate that much particles either, so it becomes an awkward dance. I just personally wouldn't recommend Sara, and this problem is further magnified if she isn't C6, in which case she isn't even worth considering. The best unit you can place in this role is going to be Yelan or Furina, as they still provide strong buffs while doing great personal damage of their own, as well as the Hydra element enabling stronger swirls. To briefly explain, the way you rotate in these Raiden teams is to Kazuha burst inside of Bennett's burst so that you can pyro infuse Kazuha, as this enables more reactions than if it was to be Electro infused, adding an extra amount of reaction damage to the team, which is nice. Don't do this if the enemies can be easily staggered though, Overload will send the enemies flying back. Besides the Hydras, you can also place Fischl here as she's just a strong off-field damage dealer. Make sure that you burst on Fischl so you get the resolve, and you can actually front-load some damage by using Fischl's skill directly into her burst. Yai can also go in this team for Raikou setups, though it is worse than using Fischl, as Yai's off-field damage is worse. Though in heavy multi-wave content where Yai's turrets will constantly attack multiple enemies, or just if your Yai's burst is strong enough to one-shot enemies, it can be a really competitive consideration that is fun as you alternate between Yai and Raiden's nukes. Now for the Chevreuse-oriented Raiden hyper teams, at C6 you can run a team like Bennett, Chevreuse, and Sara. You do have to try and cheat out extra power application through using a normal attack with a C6 Bennett before bursting on Raiden, so Chev's resistant tread can somewhat lost, or just through her C2 I guess. It still does run into the same issues as Kazuha's variants though, so if you're willing to subject yourself to that, go ahead. I am more willing to tell you to just run jangling and save yourself the stress, and this is one of Raiden's best multi-wave teams and just a very potent team overall. Besides these hyper setups, there are other Raiden Chevreuse teams, some of which don't even need to include Bennett. Jangling completes the trio, and then from there you can add in Yaimiko, Fischl, or if you hate yourself, Kujosara. The Bennettless Chevreuse teams focus less on Raiden's personal damage, and the damage is a lot more split between all the teammates, and don't worry, between Chevreuse and Raiden, Jangling doesn't really run into energy problems at all. Moving away from Chevreuse, a very popular Raiden team that takes advantage of everything that makes her good is Raiden National, or Rational for short. Raiden, Bennett, Jangling, and a Hydra unit of your choice. If your Jangling is better than your Raiden, you want to prioritize vaping her, in which case go with Xingqiu, as he applies the most Hydro, giving you that consistency. Yulon can be a damage upgrade if your Raiden and Jangling are at equal investment, and if your Raiden is a lot better than your Jangling, then Furina is going to be your best bet, as she buffs Raiden the most. Keep in mind that you are going to lose some vapes though due to the nature of Furina's Hydra application. Raiden is great on these teams as she allows Jangling and your Hydra unit, who usually have high energy needs, to run lower ER, which can enable them to run strong weapons or use a more offensive stance instead of an energy recharge one, and also saves you the stress of spamming Bennett's skills so you can funnel your Jangling. Raiden additionally is Electra, which coexists alongside Hydro on an enemy, which allows Jangling to both vaporize and overload the same hit, just giving a free extra instance of damage during your rotations. The only flaws to this team is that it's very single target oriented, as you don't get AoE Hydra application really, and with the National Core you can expand much higher by running Sucrose or international teams, though as a sort of compensation this team is a lot more easier to pilot, which is an advantage in itself. If you want a slight alteration to this team that makes it better in AoE and saves you a Hydra unit, do not laugh, but unironically, one of the best Raiden teams in the game right now utilizes Emily in place of your Hydra unit. You get enough burning procs to maximize the weird perfume lady's damage, and Emily normally has to burst every other rotation due to her high energy requirement, but with Raiden that isn't the case, drastically increasing her own damage, and giving another AoE frontload on top of Raiden's. If you have Emily and can't find a place for her, this team is unironically amazing and is one of my new favorite Raiden teams. Also, even though you have an Electro and Dendro unit, Quicken just doesn't exist on this team. Another one of my favorite Raiden teams is Double Hydro, mainly because I have both Furina and Yulon signature, and this team allows me to not care about the requirements at all. Raiden of course, Furina, Yulon or Xingqiu, and an Onoma healer, whether that's Sayu, Jin or Shangyun. Sayu is worse than both. Jin is great and with C2 is super funny to play here, but you can run into troubles with Swirling Electro, which is annoying, and Shangyun is technically the best as she has the most consistent double swirl setups due to her being a catalyst, as well as the fact that her energy requirements are low enough to run Thrilling Tails, which is another buff to Raiden that Jin or Sayu can't provide. And a slight spoiler warning for Shilonen. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Leopard Girl also acts as a healer on this team and will be the new best in slot when she comes out. It doesn't matter that she isn't team-eyed, her buffs are just that strong. Now getting into the Dendro teams, you have Raiden Aggravate for starters. You of course use Fischl, your defensive Dendro option of choice, and an Onoma unit. Or if you're the person who decided to record my gameplay, yes Emily, I'm talking about you, then you play Elegy Cole. Don't ask. I'm unable to record my own gameplay due to reasons, so I'd like to thank Emily who logged onto my account to record all this stuff for me. She has a YouTube channel of her own where she speedruns, if you couldn't tell by all the cringe booking. So if you could go to her channel and call her cringe for booking, I'd very much appreciate it. Now back to talking about Raiden Aggravate. Raiden doesn't apply that much Electro, nor does she really benefit that much from Aggravate's additive increase due to her already high scalings. And she also doesn't get innate benefits from building EM, but she just does enough damage on these teams to where even with these flaws in mind, it's still a solid team. And she's also mostly driving Fischl anyways, which she's very good at, so you still can't really go wrong here. Now still keeping Raiden on field, there are also Quick Bloom teams which are only really relevant when you can add in Furina, so just to support her with Baizu and Nahida. Again, it has the same issues to where Raiden doesn't benefit at all from building EM, but the damage of the team is mostly being saved here due to the fact that she triggers Hyper Blooms. Speaking of triggering Hyper Blooms, did you guys know that if you actually give Raiden full EM artifacts and weapons and use her skill without on-fielding her, you get a really good Hyper Bloom trigger that can proc Dendro cores every second? Isn't it so hilarious that you can run this on-field carry as an off-field unit? Isn't this the funniest thing ever? Please laugh, laugh, laugh! I'm sorry if my hate for Raiden Hyperbloom is showing a little bit, but this joke has been dragged for so long and it's just so unfunny. Regardless, Raiden can indeed be a Hyperbloom trigger, either running alongside a Nahida or Baizu Dendro driver, or as a Hyperbloom support for Nouvelette, or I'll hide them. There's nothing much to say, just build as much EM as possible and trigger reactions. It is a good and cheap team to farm, don't get me wrong, but especially the Nahida and Baizu driving teams are starting to show their age, and I would just recommend playing Raiden as an on-field carry, unless you are like really down in the trenches with artifact farming. But with that, we have covered all of Raiden's best team archetypes. Let's talk about her constellations now. Raiden's constellations are very funny because she has like 3 good ones, conveniently her first 3, and the rest are complete fucking garbage. Starting with her C1, I don't get why people shout on it so much. I guess it's because it's lower power compared to her C2, but this essentially enables you to max out resolve on all of her teams, which is just free damage. It is a 7% damage increase, which is whatever, though her weapon is going to be a bigger upgrade if you want to pull for only 1 extra vertical upgrade, assuming you're using the catch. Moving on to her C2, we have the worst constellation in the game. I'm joking. Raiden C2 makes it so that all her burst attacks ignore 60% of the enemy's defense, which is stupidly strong, and I don't need to explain why. Raiden does not need this constellation. She's a pretty perfectly serviceable carry even at C0. The only reason for you to pull this constellation is pretty much if you want to justify using Sara, and that's about it. 37% damage increase over her C1. C3 is her last good constellation, just increasing her burst talent by +3, a 22% damage increase, and now we get to her bad constellations. C4 is a 30% buff to your teammate's attack, which sounds good on paper until you realize a bunch of things. 1. This does nothing on your first rotation as it has to be after Raiden's burst expires. 2. Currently a lot of Raiden's best teammates are HP skillers who get no benefit at all. And 3. This constellation comes after her C2, which incentivizes you to run Raiden as a hyper carry. So why the fuck is this constellation now telling you to run teammates that do damage? It's just a bad constellation. C5 increases her skill talent, which you would think would be amazing, more burst damage, but no! Her burst stops giving more damage bonus past level 9, so this is nothing for the team. It still does increase her skill damage, so adding in the hits, I came pause to a 4% damage increase. To round up the streak of dogshit Raiden constellations, this was made pretty much just for her synergy with the Aimiko, who can burst every rotation in her teams. Please just stop at C3. And that will conclude the guide. In conclusion, Raiden is still an excellent character that may not reach the highest highs that some other DPS units do, but that doesn't matter due to the extreme amount of comfortability she provides in her expansive team building, energy generation, and very easily accessible playstyle that focuses more on the team's damage rather than her own personal damage output. I don't know why people in this community are so scared of any carry that isn't doing 80% of the team's damage. You are allowed to have multiple characters in the team do damage and it isn't a flaw. For me, I value off-field's damage dealers a lot. Fischl and Freen are literally 2 of my favorite characters, both in terms of their playstyle and character, as well as me having and investing into a ton of other off-field units like Zhangling, Yolan, and Emily. And a character that is able to enhance all of these characters by allowing them to not worry about energy requirements and gear more into damage, to the extent that allows her teams to still be relative to the modern carries, is evidence of a unit with strong staying power that will continue to age well. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on Raiden, as I'd love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.